Hello and welcome to the second series of webinars from Emergency Services Times. I'm Catherine Levin and I am the editor of Emergency Services Times. Our intention with this series is to continue a conversation that we started in the Emergency Services show back in September. Many of the speakers who joined in our webinar series were from the show and are here now to share their experience. After the success of our first series, we today are looking at HS2. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll be looking at a different topic, which is all about local authority finance and the impact of bankruptcy on emergency services. In our webinars, we ask our speakers to talk about their work, providing insights and thoughts about the future of the topic that we're talking about. Our unique selling point, of course, is that we are multi-agency, so you'll always get a view from across the blue lights. The webinar's a chat. There's no presentation, there's no slides. We're having a valuable conversation that leaves you with something to take away and talk about with your colleagues back in your workplace. We have a Q&A function with our webinar software, so please use that to contribute questions, and where we can, we'll pick those up through the conversation and explore the topic in more depth. You'll also receive CPD accreditation by joining us today. We will provide confirmation by email after the webinar, and for those of you watching on catch-up, you too will receive that later in the month. Our plan is to run for about 50 minutes in total today. So let's get started. We'll now see our speakers come onto the stage. So I'm delighted to introduce Jim Smith, Wes Routledge, Keith Harland and Ralph Ashwood. Jim Smith is from the HS2 team, Ralph Ashwood is from HS2C1, Wes Routledge is from East of England's Ambulance Service, where he heads up resilience, and Keith Harland is the Group Commander in Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service. Welcome to you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
So first of all, let's look back at the experience of the Emergency Services show. This is very much about getting the band back together, where you all spoke on the lessons learned theatre back in September. I know, Jim, you were very keen to speak at the show about HS2, and I think for me, it's about understanding why a massive engineering project like this is of interest in emergency services. So I wonder if you can start the webinar off by just telling us why you're interested and what's it to do with the emergency services.
Yeah, sure. The emergency services play a key role in the delivery of HS2. We've got hundreds of construction sites along the line of route, and they're quite often large and complex sites, and that's sort of repeated in several emergency services areas. We put safety at the heart of everything that we do on the programme, so it's absolutely essential for us that the blue lights are integrated into our emergency plans at all of those various locations. And the reason that we wanted to highlight that at the Emergency Services show really was to celebrate the collaboration. We wanted to give Wes, Keith, the sort of the limelight with their peers to actually show the great work that's been going on and that's actually repeated as well elsewhere across the HS2 programme.
Right, and if you were to give me an elevator pitch about what HS2 is, what would that be? Tell me in a nutshell, and our listeners, what HS2 is all about. What's the goal?
So HS2 is about levelling up the UK. It is a high-speed rail link that's running from London through to the West Midlands. It's all about increasing capacity on the rail network. The existing West Coast Main Line is at capacity, so by shifting the passenger transport onto the dedicated high-speed route, it then means that we can do more with the rest of the rail infrastructure in the UK. So we're enabling that to enable the benefits on the national rail network, and also sort of increasing freight capacity as well, so it helps on the roads. So it's not just about the high-speed line, it's about the impact that has on the wider infrastructure.
Right, you did that in about 4, maybe 10 levels of my building, so that's excellent for the elevator pitch. So in terms of East of Ambulance, Wes, I'm interested in why you're interested in HS2. Where do you fit into this?
So good afternoon. So part of my role in my job is to look after emergency planning for the county of Hertfordshire. This involves being part of the local resilience forum. So people like myself and Keith come together and we look at emergency planning across a broad range of activities. So that could be football stadiums, large events, coma sites, infrastructure projects. Also, we work closely with the local health resilience partnership. So we look at emergency planning response to these sites. And I'm sure most of the people on this call will be aware that a fundamental piece of legislation that underpins all this is the Civil Contingencies Act 2004, and that sets out a single framework for civil protection in the UK. So in a nutshell, the ambulance service has got to have plans in place to be able to deal with a response such as this. The Hearts Risk Register also lists things like accidents and system failures. So a site that's down near Rickmansworth, Maple Cross, that can have potentially up to 1,000 people, a hotel, working at height, borders the M25, and why we're here today, the 16-kilometre tunnel under the Chiltern Hills. It's imperative that the likes of Keith, Ralph and I all work closely together to ensure we understand what a response looks like. So from my point of view, ambulance, I'd be very keen to understand, what safe systems of work are in place, what medical mitigation might already be in place, and how we can bring that together collaboratively. And essentially, that's how I suppose we came to get around the table in the first instance. And then I won't sort of steal the thunder now, but we'll sort of speak about how we've collaboratively brought further CAP 1 and 2 responders later in the programme. Thank you.
Great, lovely. Thank you, Wes. That's very clear. So you mentioned the LRF, the critical organisation that brings all those partners together, and obviously the fire service is a key part of that. So Keith, do you want to give us a sense of how Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service got involved and how your role is working today?
Yeah, so from the very start, Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service has been involved through our fire engineers. So with HS2 in the field, discussing fire engineering solutions to keep the workers safe while the tunnel's under construction, and eventually when it gets through to the end and completion. And then it was very important that we got involved from the start with regards to district and emergency planning for how we would deal with an incident of a type of such in a tunnel that's potentially going to be, well, it will be 16 kilometres long when it's completed. And it's really important that we get involved with the site operators, because that's not something that the Fire and Rescue Service, certainly in Hertfordshire, have done very often. We have tunnels within Hertfordshire on the rail line. They're normally 200 to 250 metres in length. This was something completely different. And also getting an understanding of construction techniques, what can be introduced in the event of emergency, how the site will react, but also how, as a fire service, that we can attend an incident and make sure that we deal with it in a safe manner for those that are there and also for our staff. So really important that we got involved early.
Okay, excellent. And so in terms of the resilience then, we understand it from an emergency services point of view, from what Wes and Keith have told us, but from a major programme point of view, project, I'm not sure whether you use project or programme for this, but in terms of HS2's point of view, from the contractor's point of view, from the managing it, where does resilience fit in the conversations? Is it the thing done at the board table? Is it done every day? What does resilience look like in a big project like this? Jim,
resilience
like
has,
on that?
There's many levels in HS2. So at its base level, resilience is all about our ability to manage change and manage disruptive events. And that does work sort of right from the top. I'm sort of going through briefings with our exec at the moment about our incident management capability, which is all part of that bigger resilience picture. In the context of what we're talking about today, it's really about the resilience of our construction activities. So making sure that we operate in a safe environment and that we're really well prepared to respond when things go wrong. In terms of sort of HS2 as the organisation, I work in the client organisation, but we then have a number of main civils contractors who are delivering the works on our behalf. And Ralph picks up that for our C1 section, which is the South Portal. So probably best if I hand over to Ralph to talk about what it means for a line and the South Portal.
Yes, please do. Ralph, share that with us, please.
Good afternoon. So on these very large major infrastructure projects, we need to ensure, as Jim has already said, that our workforce are safe, and that's a huge part of what we do every day. But there are occasions when things don't go according to plan, mechanical breakdowns, etc. And so for us, working with the emergency services, so particularly on such a large site, but our South Portal site here is 55 hectares, and as Wes alluded to earlier on, we have a 160-room hotel on site. It's operated. It's made out of containers. It's a little bit smarter than just containers. They're quite nice little rooms, but that's for the workers because there's very little accommodation in the area, and lots of our workers come from all over the country and all over the world. So there's accommodation there for them. But also we have factories. So for the tunnelling activity, we produce tunnel segments that are around 9 tonnes each. So we've got a factory on site that was producing those segments for the tunnelling activities. Part of our contract is also to deliver a viaduct over Denham. So we have a factory that is producing 134 tonne segments for the viaduct. We have our main office here with some 300 people working in it, as well as all of our sort of contractors and workforce on site. So in order for, should there be any kind of incident, and that could just be a medical emergency, you know, somebody taken unwell, we need to ensure that we've got an appropriate system in place to ensure that the emergency services know where we are, know who to speak to when they get here, and are able to respond effectively, on top of the arrangements that we already have on site with our first aiders. We've trained a number of people to FREC 3 standard, of an occupational health team with nurses, etc. So we have an awful lot of immediate resilience, but there are occasions when we are going to need, or potentially the emergency services on site. So making sure that we've got processes that make that happen. And as Keith and Wes alluded to, they've not seen this scale of construction in Hertfordshire, I would imagine, for a very long time, of this nature. So giving them the experience and showing them what we do, what we already have in place, helps to build those relationships, and means that should there be an incident, everybody knows what's going on, and we've got a bit of a plan, and it works seamlessly.
Okay, all right, that's excellent. So it sounds to me like you've basically created a small sort of settlement town in the middle of Hertfordshire.
Yes,
kind of.
Yes.
For a little while, and then move up the line, maybe as it kind of extends. It did make me think slightly about the RRO and the fire aspects of that. This 160-room hotel that we're learning about is in boxes. So Keith, from your point of view, in terms of the RRO, did you have to go and do fire risk assessments and look at the sort of enforcement and fire safety there?
Yeah, so just going back, you know, to what we said at the beginning around fire engineers and fire protection. So throughout the construction phase and anything that's been implemented on the small town, because that's pretty much what it is, we've ensured that all of the factories, all of the accommodation, all of the offices conform to the regulatory reform order, but also from a operational response point of view, in our due diligence to have a response plan to the site, my district has picked up that with Wes and the police.
Excellent. Okay, great. That sort of gives you a real sense of what it looks like now, this little town, I imagine there. So let's talk about JESIP. So I'm sure lots of people watching us today and on Catch Up will be aware of JESIP and the sort of idea of interoperability principles, so you all sort of know what you're doing. And I just wondered, Keith, if you could just introduce the concepts of JESIP for those who don't know, and then we'll sort of explore why this programme has been unusual in that you've had commercial people and emergency services people both adopting the same principles for success here. So perhaps, Keith, if you could just give us a quick elevator pitch on JESIP, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. So there were several incidents in the UK going back to 2005 and the bombings in London. We had the mass floodings around 2012. Some of the learning that came out of that was perhaps the emergency services weren't as coordinated in their responses as they should have been. And I think nationally that's been taken on board. So JESIP principles were brought together and adopted by all emergency services and embedded within how we deal with an incident, whether that be a two-car RTC on a motorway, right up to significant impact incidents like an incident, say, at HS2, or whether we say a major incident or an upper coma site, something like that. So basically, all of the officer in charges for the respective services and Category 2 responders will co-locate. They will set up a form of communication that's jargon-free. They will then coordinate the response based on the lead agency and ensuring that the use of resources on the site are pointed in the right direction to facilitate, first of all, the saving of life and then the reduction of the incident as it progresses. There needs to be a joint understanding of risk for everyone there, because, again, this is why we've worked in, and I'll touch on that a little bit when we go down to HS2 and speak to Ralph, and then a full shared situational awareness where we're sending out the same messages across the emergency services so that everyone has the same updated picture. That's worked quite well within the emergency services and has been embedded for some time. What's been really important is that when we put this working group together, and Wes is leading it now, we wanted to embed those principles with construction, other sites and venues within Hertfordshire, so that when we turn up, they're well versed in the JESIP principles, and they can adopt and co-locate with us, communicate that shared situational awareness, joint understanding of risk. And that's been taken to heart by HS2 and by Align and Ralph's team, who have welcomed us in. We've offered some training with regards to JESIP. They've adopted some of the similar practices, and then we've rehearsed that within our training, and it's proven to work really well. So,
okay. Well, we'll come on to the training side and how you've kind of put that into practice. Wes, do you want to add anything else from an ambulance perspective in terms of JESIP and what Keith just described before we turn to Ralph and Jim?
I suppose just very briefly, obviously, we need to act quickly when there's a risk to life, and essentially what Keith spoke about is kind of jargon-free language. We've said to HS2, obviously, it's a significant construction project with loads of complexities, and so if an ambulance commander turns up to scene, how significant it is to kind of relay that in clear, concise language, so that we can adopt a method of either sort of helping somebody in an area that we wouldn't conventionally go to, or standing back because it might be too risk critical to sort of send people forward, and also a bit of an understanding about each other's capabilities, and work very closely with Ralph and his team around what can they do preemptively around JESIP to support that. So they've already sort of donned the tabards. They've got a process in place to escort vehicles to the FCP. They've got pre-designated RVPs and FCPs at the tunneling office, so we're clear where we'd even go before an incident is instigated, and then an understanding around what equipment can they bring that they need to share with us. So, for example, for high acuity medical instances, we've liaised closely with them around procuring equipment that's compatible with these. As examples would be extrication devices, Lucas devices to support CPR, AEDs, medical gases, pain relief, hemorrhage control kits. So at the point of the call, they can already start moving the patient out of an area towards the external environment. And that kind of joined up conversation early on, even before the incident, has been really, really, really crucial. And to contextualise that further, even for a low acuity incident where this supported, not reliance on the statutory ambulance service, they were able to deal exclusively on their own with a low acuity patient in the tunnel, where by way they dealt with it, the pain relief, and they even took them to hospital. So that collaborative approach essentially is working for high and low end stuff.
Excellent. Okay, that's good to get the two perspectives from fire and ambulance there. So Ralph, let me ask you, before you joined the HS2 project and with you as a supplier, did you know anything about JESIP? Was it completely new to you, or did you bring some knowledge with you?
So I already brought some knowledge to the table, I guess. So ever since I was very little and been a member of St John Ambulance, I've worked in control rooms. I've worked as part of my role in St John. I'm one of the tactical commanders at a South London football club, looking after the St John personnel there. So having that understanding of JESIP is it's already embedded in what we kind of do. I've worked on a number of large civil engineering projects over the last sort of 10 years, and I've tried to bring that information, that JESIP principles, into that. Some of that's driven a little bit by our clients wanting that liaison with emergency services, but also it's good for us. It gives us that benefit, as Wes says, to be able to make us as important as the emergency services at the scene of an incident. Many years ago, was involved with an incident where on another project completely, where 2 hours into the incident, there was no representative of the company I was working for in the inner cordon at the huddle. And so it sort of made it quite my agenda, I guess, to bring that forward and make us part of that team on these projects. And this has been the most successful part I think we've ever done with that.
Okay. What I was going to ask you was in terms of if you brought that knowledge and understanding and from your personal life as well, it sounds, from the sort of voluntary work you do, have you noticed as a result of working with HS2 and with our colleagues from Hertfordshire and East England Ambulance, any differences or anything new learning or any nuances which are, or did you find actually the principles just work regardless? Is there anything different?
I think the principles just work regardless. I mean, that's the beauty of them. They're so simple.
So it proves it works.
For us as a construction organisation, though, actually introducing that to our construction teams, because they have, and across construction, I don't believe that it's adopted as widely as it could be, to have that understanding, so that when there is an incident, we are valuable, as Wes said, we are valuable to the huddle, so that we can share that information. We have equipment, we have, we know the layout of the project, we know where things are, and sharing that information can, use the term, reduce the care gap and make sure that we have an effective response to an incident.
Yeah. Okay. And so Wes and Keith, I wonder, in terms of having a contractor who's so well versed and thinking about it and bringing it into this project, were you surprised by that? Did you think you'd have to educate them? Is this unusual? You find other suppliers doing the same thing? Things that you're
I suppose in terms of, I'd probably say the biggest kind of thing, massive positive, was the early open door engagement from the site. I think that opened up where possibly, maybe, I won't speak for Keith, but for myself, it was very much an open door policy from day one. So whether it was a case of doing some joint training or whether it was a case of doing some site familiarisation, I'd probably say I haven't had that level of engagement such early on in a project. Keith, I don't know about yourself.
No, I would agree. I think that it really does assist us as an emergency services, certainly coming in with our planning. If the place that we're doing the planning on have the same mindset and are open to adopting to us, so that when we attend their site, everything is in an order that we're used to. I would go on to say that there are some other places that have adopted similar within Hertfordshire, certainly through fire and rescue service experience of planning, but it tends to have been people within that organisation like Ralph that have potentially come from an emergency services background and fully understand the benefits of JESIP. So I think there's still work to do nationally about embedding JESIP perhaps with all of our industry partners, but also any major places of significance within the county borders.
Right. Okay. Just looking at one of our questions. The question at the moment is around county borders. Now, we know that emergency services work well across borders in terms of that engagement when you need to call in resources. But the question itself is around whether, because you run close to other county borders, what collaboration have you done with your respective ambulance and fire, and possibly police as well, I shouldn't, about LRF environment, in order to sort of think about how it works on the margins? What have you done with those arrangements, Keith or Wes?
So I'm happy to sort of start that and sort of build on what Keith sort of got in the pipeline as well. So early on in the project, one of the geographical complexes of the site was the site sits near a town called Maple Cross, Rickmansworth. It borders the M25, the London Borough of Hillingdon, and the county of Buckinghamshire. And one of the complexities was that the boring itself starts in the county of Hertfordshire and goes under the Chiltern Hills. But for the first 3 years, which that sort of date we're kind of bizarrely approaching now, or just going over, is all of the construction activity was coordinated from the South Portal site. So we realised, obviously, that was very unique in itself in terms of geographical. And then so we looked at how a response would look, and to bring some clarity and coordination, we introduced a strategic group to look at an MOU, so that if a 999 call went into one of the emergency services, it was clear where that was going to land in terms of the initial response. That's not to sort of negate or overlook the fact that all of the services would probably lean on each other for either cross-border support or mutual aid at some stage, but it was kind of important we sort of knew where that clarity was. We've then done some testing and exercise, and obviously we'll come on to a bit. And just recently, probably the most significant answer to that question is that we've done a control room communications exercise where, because of that point, we know that we're reaching a significant landmark in the next few weeks, and by the summer there's the likelihood that we'll be able to access it from whoever the question was answered about SCAS and East. And so what we did is we tried a control room exercise whereby we brought in colleagues from SCAS and London Ambulance Service, and we put a call into the 999 system. And firstly, we tested the process of sharing information between the control rooms. We then opened up what's called the Emergency Services Channel 1, so that remote C2, remote command and control, could be done by Hertfordshire emergency services, and then we took it to a second phase where we then said, well, what about a scenario where the North Portal is now open and fully accessible by 2 county boundaries? How would that response look? And so we tested an airwaves channel around, not only with our control rooms, but with our colleagues, that we could actually share information, so that if there was a concern that the nearest resource might be the North Portal, we could basically have a commander at the South Portal and North Portal that could communicate with each other. And so we basically tested that process in line with what's about to develop and evolve over the next few months. And Keith, I don't know if you want to sort of build on any of that.
Yeah, I'll just touch on it a little bit from a fire perspective. So on our mobile data terminals, we have shared risks with all of the neighbouring brigades, but generally they're their plans and we have access to them. With HS2 from the start, certainly with all of the exercising, we've invited the neighbouring brigade of Buckinghamshire, and more recently we've involved London, because London were getting their own tunnel being constructed at Riceley. And through that engagement, there is a cross-border working group within my district that has the borough commander of Hillingdon and also the nearest group commander for the area in Buckinghamshire. And we discuss HS2, we discuss the planning. All of the plans have been shared on Resilience Direct. All of the exercising has been shared on Resilience Direct. All of the learning and the outcomes, including, and we may get onto this later, a couple of incidents that have happened there, that's been shared as well. And we've also exercised at all levels for an incident there, where we've looked at the legality of, say the incident is halfway through the tunnel, that's in the county of Buckinghamshire, but actually the response is from Hertfordshire. So we've had to look at legalities across who would actually be responsible. For argument's sake, it might be the coroner's ground of Buckinghamshire, but the response will lie with Hertfordshire. So we've had to test quite a wide range, the latest being the communication exercise, but it's been an open door for Hertfordshire to say to anyone that could be involved, please come along and share the journey. There will have to be a joint plan going forward, which is a little bit different than what we're used to. Normally, a fire service will hold on to a plan and share, but as the entrance becomes open up at North, then there will definitely be a more coordinated joint plan between Hertfordshire and Buckinghamshire.
Okay, goodness, it's quite complex. Now, I'm glad we were asked that question, because actually that kind of border, the nuances that you've just described, it sounds like you've really thought about it, but actually it is quite complicated. I just wanted to ask Jim, in terms of thinking about HS2 in the future, you told me that it's going to become a Cat 2 responder. So all of these things here that we're talking about are going to be, business as usual. What are your thoughts on moving to that phase? I know we're stepping slightly ahead there, but just in terms of them being one of those responders, will that make what you're learning now from all of this, will that make any difference to you?
It all sort of comes together. So we will become a Cat 2 responder once we're a licensed infrastructure manager. It's part of our journey to becoming an operational railway. Similar to Ralph, I've sort of had a background in the CCA space prior to coming to HS2, which I think helps drive this. And we've been working with the Cabinet Office, we've been working with the local resilience forums, recognising that we will have this Cat 2 status, but also recognising that we can't wait until we've got trains going up and down the line. We need the relationship happening now. So we've been effectively running as a pseudo Cat 2 organisation. We have partnership groups with all of the LRF areas along the line of routes. Although we don't attend the formal LRF sessions because we're not that responder, we still engage with all of those organisations. So hopefully when we do become a formal Cat 2, it's fairly seamless, and we're just doing more of what we're already doing at the moment.
Excellent. No, that's really good to hear. So we've talked about training, exercising. We've talked about the working between agencies. But let's go a bit darker now. So what happens when it goes wrong? So I know from the show, when you did your session, you talked about a fire in the tunnel, which was quite alarming. So I wonder, Ralph, could you describe to us what happened? And then we'll look at the response to that, given all the preparation that you've put in place.
Yes, of course. So on the 10th of May in 2022, which seems like an awfully long time ago now, we if I put a bit of context around the tunnel in its in the first instance. So we have 2 tunnel boring machines that are 170 meters long. Our tunnel is 10 meters in diameter, so it's quite a substantial size tunnel, or the 2 tunnels. So we have, in order to get the workforce and materials and equipment to the tunnel boring machine, and as we alluded to earlier on, it is now almost 16 kilometres in length, so both of them.
Wow.
So we have to have vehicles that manoeuvre, move materials and so on into those into the tunnel. We have a vehicle that we call a PSV, or a passenger service vehicle. The best way I can describe it is a push me pull you vehicle. So it has a cab at either end, and they always drive it forwards. These vehicles are fairly large. They have a cabin between the 2 cabs that will seat 21 people. And on the evening of the 10th of May, unfortunately, the engine compartment in one of these PSVs with 21 people on board caught fire. We have a fire suppression system fitted to all of our underground equipment or mobile plant. The operator of the vehicle, the vehicle stopped. He identified that there was an issue in the engine compartment, identified that there was a fire, operated the fire suppression system. Everybody was evacuated, and everybody evacuated the tunnel safely. Those that were on the passenger service vehicle. Unfortunately, the fire suppression system did exactly what it was designed to do, which was suppress the fire. And that was a huge lesson learned for the industry, actually. We've relied very heavily on fire, this term fire suppression. We don't very often, dare I say it, have fires in tunnels, so it doesn't necessarily get tested from that perspective. And there's some great, there's a really good video. I've shared the link with you for the British Tunnelling Society. There is a whole lecture around the tunnel fire and the lessons learned from that. But ultimately, the engine compartment reignited, and the incident developed from there. Our tunnel boring machines at the time were at about 5 kilometres into the tunnel. The passenger service vehicle caught fire around 2.5 kilometres into the tunnel. We have refuge chambers on the tunnel boring machines and situated along the length of the tunnel. There were 3 operators. We were at shift change time, and there were 3 operators that were on a back shift undertaking some maintenance on the TBM. So at 5 kilometres into the tunnel, they made their way to the refuge chamber, secured themselves there, and we were able to monitor the air quality. We were able to see them. We have video links, phone links to them. There's ship's biscuits in the refuge chamber. There's water. There's toilets, so they're self-contained in that location. So we knew that they were safe, and the other guys, the other 20 people that were on the PSV, all evacuated safely, no issues. We have self-rescuers, so chemical rebreathers. They're on the MSVs. The guys are carrying them with them as well, so they all evacuated safely. And obviously, at the time, the emergency services were called. We identified the fire. And through all of our exercising meant that actually that incident ran very smoothly. As after that, after we declared it an incident and the fire service turned up and the ambulance.
Okay, so in terms of they're a long way underground at this point, going 2.5 kilometres into the tunnel. Keith, did your firefighters go into the tunnel and rescue them and do what they needed to do, or what did they do?
No, so as part of the planning and with the fire engine solutions that we knew would be at the beginning, because the tunnel's not complete, if you can imagine a completed railway tunnel will have all of the emergency exits, it'll have cross passageways, it'll have shafts. Well, while under construction, they're not there and in place yet, so there has to be other procedures put in place. And it was agreed that the refuge chamber solution would be the best way of dealing with it, due to the fact that we can't travel in breathing apparatus 5 kilometres down a tunnel. It's just not feasible.
Yes, indeed. So you weren't committing your staff and BA into the tunnel at all then, by the sounds of it.
So we had to take confidence in the plan. The plan was that there we go, the refuge chamber, that we would monitor them. We would keep an eye on the fire using cameras and adapt as the plan came. But because the plan was well written and well versed, as Ralph has said, it gave us the confidence that we knew that the people in the refuge chamber were safe. They were going to be safe for, well, a minimum of 24 hours, but could have been up to 3 or 4 days, realistically, in as much as safe in that chamber if required to be. So it allowed us to sort of not rush, and we could allow the fire to go out naturally, and then it was a case of just waiting for the smoke to come out for us to then be able to enter and retrieve the people safely. So it's not quite what we're used to as a response for fire, because the plan was written that way. It was well rehearsed that way. On the day, that's exactly what happened. It's given us a real confidence that we know that our plan is good and suitable, regardless of.
Can I pick up on the point about suppression? So Ralph, you said that the system you had suppression. So you're talking about sprinklers, some kind of water coming down and dousing this fire. Would that be a simple way of describing it? So how on earth do you get the water?
So it's a powder-based suppression system inside the engine compartment itself. So deployed from outside, they press the button, an emergency button, and that deploys the fire suppression system. But again, one of those lessons learned, I will refer you to the BTS presentation, because that covers it.
We'll share the link. We'll share the link with our
in a little bit of detail. So one of my colleagues presented that. But it's the idea around cool and quench. So we've relied on this idea of suppression just being, it's written into the British standards for safety in tunnelling. You must have suppression systems fitted, but actually that's fine. But actually, wasn't really a lot of consideration around reignition. So you just accept the suppression system works. Thank you very much. It's all fitted. And I think that's something that the industry has learned and will go away. And future designs of equipment will make sure that it has two forms. So both that suppression and extinguishment, and that anything that can be cooled. Also challenging our suppliers around design of things like engine compartments, hose runs, all of those kind of things. So there's also like hydraulic hoses and fuel hoses and so on. So there's a bit of work that our suppliers can do as well to improve the outcome of that kind of scenario.
Great. So before we go on to how we share learning, I want to just bring in one of our questions, which is around locating an incident. So we know now that it was 2.4 kilometres along the tunnel, but how did you know where it was, and how do the emergency service responders get to know where it is in order to know where to deploy their appliances and other resources? What's the geospatial side of this? How do you know where things are, given how vast it all is?
So if I start with that, so in our tunnel, we have a tracking system. So all of our operatives have their own individual tracker, and we can see where they are within a few meters on
like an AirTag. Which is
kind of like, very
okay.
similar to an AirTag, absolutely. And they are individually issued, so we know it's a bit like the old-fashioned sort of brass tally system that you might have for confined spaces, but we've got electronic, and we can track those people. We also track all of our vehicles in the tunnel, and we in our logistics cabin, which is the forward command point in the event of an incident. All of that information is displayed, and people can see it. We can actually pinpoint who's in the refuge chambers as well, via their tags. We know exactly where they are. And all of our vehicles are tracked as well, so we can know exactly where these things are. We do have CCTV in the tunnel as well. Tends to point at critical infrastructure items in the tunnel, so pumps and things like that, so that if there is an issue with those, we can see it. So it doesn't cover the whole tunnel, but we were able to identify fairly quickly that location. All of our operators of the plant, they have radios. We have phone systems, so it was very easy for them to report the incident and tell them exactly where they are. All of the tunnel rings are numbered, so it's very quick to identify where you are in the tunnel.
I think that gives us a strong sense of how to locate, and all that location data, is that all shared with the emergency services in terms of them being able to give that to their crews and integrate with their systems? Perhaps Wes, do you want to help us with that?
So obviously it's a separate system to what we'd use, but going back to the point is, we've done 6 exercises there, and one of the things we would have tested is understanding through JESIP, like, what is the coordinated response? So where is the command point that's in the tunnelling office? What does the CCTV look like? What's the tracking look like? So our commanders are well rehearsed. If at the point of an incident, they can go there and they can feel comfortable. If there's a roll call, that's the area of the information it will come into. So yeah, they're different systems, but the engagement is the key to this.
Okay, and then the other. Sorry, Keith, I was just going to move on to the question around communications as well. So we've kind of talked about how to find people, but then how do you communicate? So perhaps, Keith, in terms of the question here about airwave and the extent to which that can be used underground, and then the move to ESM, which we're not quite there yet, but let's just stick with airwave for now. What are the sort of discussions you've been having about how to communicate, actually, with radios just now, Ralph, but between the emergency services? How do you all communicate? Are you all using airwave together?
So because the plan at the moment is there's a full, within the tunnel, there is a full line system, if you like, a mobile network. So you can communicate over WhatsApp, you can call people that are in the tunnel. The emergency services, we can jointly use airwave, and airwave will connect to the phone network underneath. So we can use airwave underground. Local fire and rescue services like Hertfordshire, we use for our breathing apparatus. We don't use airwave. We use a handheld radio that will only operate within a certain distance. So should we put people into the tunnel, then they go on the safe side. We will have people that have airwave radio that can communicate out the tunnel, but they will use that more localized digital radio breathing apparatus sets to operate within the incident.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I'm conscious that we're at 2:45 now. So I just want to we've already talked about, somebody mentioned Resilience Direct earlier in terms of being able to put the lessons, to use that as a resource. In terms of JOL, so the Joint Organisational Learning. Organisation. I couldn't quite remember my O's there. So are you using that as a basis to share learning, not just simply between yourselves, but with others, thinking about the ones who will be affected by the HS2 as it goes north, but also just broadly across the emergency services? What is the plan with using JOL? If one of you wants to pick up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fire service are well versed using NOL, so I am going to go with National Operational Learning, where if it's something that's learning that we need to share out across fire and rescue services, whether that be safety critical or incident of note, that goes up. If you have an incident like we've had at HS2, which has been multi-agency, then we do a multi-agency debrief. And if there is any learning to come out of that, then that gets notified up and disseminated through JOL, which is your joint organisational learning. And we did it for HS2. So there was some learning for us nationally as a fire service, again, around what had been identified with the passenger service vehicle, that these are being used. Please be aware that the suppression system doesn't actually negate the heat from the fire, which can then cause a reignition. So those sort of notes go out, or any notable practice, or any things that we've identified. And just going back to the point about comms, HS2, when it is complete, will have airwave and emergency services network within it. And also,
that's interesting.
Or will also have a repeater for analog and digital radios. So the communication will be once the tunnel.
You covered all your bases there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's go to next steps then. So Ralph and Jim, I think there was a hint earlier that you're at some breakthrough point, which I think is popping out the other end with one of these beautifully named tunnelling devices, which I think are named after, what were their names? There's two girls, isn't it? Florence or something.
It's Florence and Cecilia. So Florence is named after.
So when they pop out the other end, what happens next?
So, well, we'll continue the liaison with the emergency services. We'll look to exercise across counties, with SCAS and with East of England, with Bucks Fire and Rescue, and with Hertfordshire, to make sure that we still have that resilience in the tunnel. We'll still be able to track people in the tunnel. Going back to the comms point, we have a full Wi-Fi link in the tunnel. We have radios that work in the tunnel across that Wi-Fi network. We have a set of radios that are suitable for the fire service and the ambulance service to take in with them should they need them. So we've got that kind of communication in there. So we'll continue to have this open door policy as we go forward, to make sure that as many people as possible are familiar with what we're doing, what our, as Wes said earlier on, what our resources are, how we manage incidents ourselves, without necessarily needing to call the emergency services, so that when we do need, if there is a time when we do need to call them, everybody is well versed in the environment that we're working in.
Right. So Jim, I'm going to invite you to do our last comments in terms of thinking of the future. So now that you've had this experience of working with the emergency services in this very collaborative, open, transparent way that we've learned today, what do you take with you in terms of resilience in the future for HS2 moving forward? What does it look like for you?
This has been very much about laying the foundations of the relationship, and we need to continue that as we move forward. So before long, Ralph will have finished his tunnels, he'll be leaving us. We've then got our next set of contractors who come along. We've mentioned about Airwave and the ESN network. We then need to fit out the viaducts, the tunnels and everything to turn railway, track, power and all of our communication systems. So that planning evolves into that stage. We then move towards trial operations. So towards the end of the decade, we'll be doing that. We'll be running trains along the track, effectively running a shadow railway to prove that it works and is safe for passenger contact or passenger use. And we're already looking at how we plan for that. So there are tests that we have to do as part of the regulations of running a railway. And we want to work with the emergency services to say, right, what do you want to do? You've got a sort of an empty railway at the moment. Where do we stop trains? Where do we test evacuations? How far do we go in that planning so that you're confident that when we then go into service, you can respond to any incident that may happen? And of course, at that point, we've also got the transition to the formal Cat 2 responder status as well. So there's still a lot of that resilience journey to go, but it's very much built on the foundations that we've got with the likes of Wes, Keith, and all of the other emergency services.
Well, what a fantastic summary. I'm so glad I brought you all back together after the show. It's really great to be able to share the session with a wider audience and for people to see some catch up so I'm so pleased that you're able to join us today. I think there's definitely a big story about collaboration, openness, transparency, engagement. These are all very strong messages, and the use of JESIP and the use of Airwave and so forth. These are really good things. So thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your experience and working. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get through all the questions, but we will endeavour to do this offline, I'm sure, but unfortunately we couldn't get to them all. So it leaves me now to time we finish. So just like to thank you all for coming today. And to our audience to know that the webinar will be available on Catch Up from our website, and any notes that we add to it. So the link that Ralph is keen for us to see with the British Tunnelling Association, I think that's what they're called, will be on there. So that'd be great for that. Yes, it will have them. And for CPD accreditation, will turn in your email, and for those on Catch Up, will come later in the month. So our next webinar happens on the 15th of February, where we'll be looking at local authority bankruptcy and what effect that has on the emergency services. And we'll be doing something on social value and procurement with our partners, Tryon Commercial Service, on the 22nd of February. If you'd like to join us for those, please sign up. You can find out more on our website, which is emergencyservicestimes.com, and you can sign up for our weekly digest to stay up to date, which leaves me just to say thank you to my speakers, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.